At 0330 hours on December 24, 1944, paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division crouched in foxholes near Werbomont, Belgium, preparing for something the division had never done before. They were preparing to retreat. The men of the 82nd had fought through Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, and 73 days of brutal combat in Holland during Operation Market Garden. They had never retreated, never yielded ground once taken. But now, after 8 days of fighting in the frozen Ardennes, they faced a decision that went against everything they believed about themselves. For the first time in the division's history, they were going to pull back. The Germans had broken through 8 days earlier. Adolf Hitler's last gamble, a massive counteroffensive aimed at splitting the Allied armies and capturing the port of Antwerp. Over 400,000 German troops smashed into thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest. Panzer divisions, SS troops, Volksgrenadiers, all backed by over 2,600 artillery pieces. The attack caught everyone by surprise. The 82nd Airborne had been resting in France after 50 days of brutal combat in Holland. The division had lost 500 to 35 men killed in action during Operation Market Garden, plus another 622, missing and over 1,700 wounded, who would not return to duty. The survivors were scattered in camps near Reims and Sicily, receiving replacements, trying to rebuild. Then came the call on December 17th, German breakthrough in the Ardennes. All reserves to move immediately. Major General James Gavin commanded the 82nd. At 37 years old, he was the youngest major general in the United States Army to command a division since the Civil War. His troops called him Jumping Jim because he made combat jumps with them, carrying an M1 rifle like any other soldier. Born in Brooklyn and placed in an orphanage around age 2, Gavin enlisted in the Army on his 17th birthday, March 22, 1924, claiming to be an orphan to bypass parental consent requirements. He graduated from West Point in 1929. He had jumped into Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, and Holland. He was the only American general to make 4 combat jumps during World War II. When the alert came on December 17th, Gavin was having dinner with his staff near Reims. Within 24 hours, the division was moving north by truck convoy through freezing rain and sleet. Paratroopers rode in the backs of 2.5-ton trucks, packed 40 men to a vehicle with no heaters and no canvas covers. The temperature was below freezing. Men wore every piece of clothing they owned and still shivered uncontrollably. The convoy moved through the night of December 18th. The roads were clogged with refugees fleeing south, Belgian civilians trying to escape the German advance, and American units that had been shattered in the initial attack. Columns of burned-out tanks and abandoned artillery pieces lined the roadsides. The 82nd reached Werbomont on the morning of December 18th. Their mission was to hold the northern shoulder of the German breakthrough, to prevent the enemy from turning north toward Liège and the Meuse River. If the Germans reached the Meuse, they could roll up the entire Allied flank. Everything depended on stopping them here, but the Germans weren't stopping. Kampfgruppe Peiper, a battle group from the 1st SS Panzer Division commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, had already penetrated deep into American lines. Peiper was 29 years old, one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS. His battle group comprised approximately 4,800 to 5,000 men and 600 to 800 vehicles, including Tiger, 2 tanks, Panthers, and assault guns. They had massacred American prisoners at Malmedy on December 17th. They were driving toward the Meuse bridges, killing everything in their path. Peiper's Kampfgruppe had broken through American lines on December 16th and raced west along narrow Belgian roads. His orders were to reach the Meuse River crossings before American forces could destroy the bridges. Speed was everything. Peiper pushed his columns forward relentlessly, bypassing resistance when possible, crushing it when necessary. His tanks rumbled through Belgian villages in the middle of the night, their tracks tearing up cobblestone streets, their engines drowning out the sound of terrified civilians hiding in cellars. On December 17th, Peiper's forces reached Stavelot and captured the town after brief fighting. An American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons of gasoline sat on the southern edge of town. If Peiper had captured that fuel, his tanks could have reached the Meuse. But American engineers set fire to the depot before withdrawing. Black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air. The flames could be seen for miles. Peiper lost the fuel his tanks desperately needed. The Kampfgruppe continued west toward Trois Ponts, where 3 rivers converged. 3 bridges at Trois Ponts provided the only practical route for armor heading toward the Meuse. American engineers from the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion waited at those bridges with demolition charges in place. When Peiper's lead tanks appeared on December 18th, the engineers blew the bridges. The explosions cut off Peiper's most direct route west. Peiper diverted north toward Staumont. His column stretched for miles along narrow forest roads. Tanks, half-tracks, trucks, all moving slowly through falling snow and freezing temperatures. American fighter bombers could not fly because of weather. German supply columns could not keep up. Peiper's tanks were running low on fuel and ammunition, but he kept pushing forward, believing that if he could just reach the Meuse, the entire operation would succeed. Behind Peiper came more SS divisions. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen, all veteran units, all equipped with the newest tanks, all commanded by officers who had been fighting since 1939. The 82nd deployed along a ragged line from Trois Ponts south to Vielsalm. The 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Reuben Tucker, took positions around Cheneux. The 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment held the crossings at the Salm River. The 508 covered the southern flank. The 325 Glider Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Harry Lewis, filled the gaps. 8,520 men, against what intelligence estimated was over 43,000 Germans, with more than 1,200 armoured vehicles. Waves of German infantry came supported by Panther and Tiger tanks. Artillery turned the frozen ground into erupting fountains of snow and steel. Mortar fire screamed down from the grey sky without warning. The paratroopers held. The 504 fought house to house in Cheneux from December 20th through December 21st. The 505 drove back repeated attacks along the Salm River. The 508 and 325 refused to yield ground even when surrounded. The fighting was desperate, close quarters, no quarter given. The battle for Cheneux demonstrated the ferocity of combat in the Ardennes. On December 20th, General Gavin ordered Colonel Tucker to take the 504 and attack Cheneux, which had been captured by elements of Peiper's Kampfgruppe. A bridge over the Amblive River at Cheneux provided Peiper with a route west to Werbomont. If left in German control, that bridge could allow Peiper to break free from the trap closing around him. Tucker committed his 1st and 3rd battalions to the attack. The paratroopers moved through snow-covered fields toward the village. German machine guns opened fire from stone houses. The 504 went to ground, then advanced by fire and movement. Squads provided covering fire, while other squads rushed forward. Platoons leapfrogged each other toward German positions. The fighting reached the village outskirts by mid-afternoon. House-to-house fighting in Cheneux was brutal. Paratroopers kicked in doors and threw grenades into rooms before entering. Germans fired from windows and doorways. Tank rounds blasted through stone walls. The village became a maze of rubble and bodies. Every building had to be cleared methodically. Paratroopers would fire into a house, rush the entrance, clear the ground floor, then fight their way upstairs. Germans who surrendered were taken prisoner. Germans who resisted were killed. The 504 cleared Cheneux by December 21st. They captured the bridge intact and drove surviving Germans back towards Staumont. American casualties were significant but manageable. German casualties were heavy. More importantly, Peiper's Kampfgruppe was now completely cut off. His only remaining escape route was back the way he had come, through American positions that were growing stronger every hour. December 1944 was one of the coldest winters on record in Belgium. Temperatures dropped to -10 degrees Celsius at night. Snow fell constantly, accumulating to depths of over half a metre. The ground froze solid, making it nearly impossible to dig foxholes. Paratroopers used axes and pickaxes to break through frozen earth, then piled snow around shallow holes for additional protection. Frostbite became as dangerous as German fire. Men who stood guard duty for more than 2 hours developed frozen feet. Division medical officers reported hundreds of cases of trench foot, where prolonged exposure to cold and wet destroyed tissue. Some men lost toes, others lost feet. The division supply system struggled to provide adequate cold weather gear. Most paratroopers wore the same wool uniforms issued for temperate climate operations. Units conducted patrol actions every night. Small squads moving through frozen forests in darkness, engaging German positions at close range, machine guns and rifles firing, muzzle flashes illuminating falling snow, tracers arcing through trees. These firefights rarely lasted more than minutes, but they were deadly. Men were killed at ranges of 50 meters or less. By December 23rd, the 82nd had lost over 900 men killed, wounded, or missing. They were holding, but barely. Then the Germans committed their reserve. The 2nd SS Panzer Division attacked from the south, trying to outflank the 82nd's positions at the Baraque de Fraiture crossroads. The attack came with overwhelming force. Tanks, assault guns, veteran panzer grenadiers who knew how to fight in winter conditions. The crossroads, also called Parker's Crossroads, after Major Arthur Parker, who commanded the defence, was held by an ad hoc force of approximately 300 to 400 men from multiple units. The 82nd had sent F Company of the 325 Glider Infantry Regiment as reinforcements, along with elements from other units. But it wasn't enough. On December 23rd, the Germans overran the position. The American defenders fought until they were almost all dead or captured. Of the 116 men from F Company 325 Glider Infantry who defended the crossroads, only 44 escaped. The German breakthrough at the crossroads created a massive gap in the 82nd's southern flank. Enemy tanks were now positioned to roll north and cut off the entire division. General Gavin faced a decision that went against everything the 82nd stood for. He could order his men to hold in place and probably get the entire division encircled and destroyed. Or he could pull back to a stronger defensive line. On the night of December 23rd, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who had taken command of all Allied forces on the northern side of the Bulge on December 20th, ordered Gavin to tidy the Allied lines. That was Montgomery's way of saying, retreat, consolidate to defensible positions, give up ground to save the troops. Gavin hated the order. His paratroopers hated it more. The 82nd Airborne did not retreat. That was the entire point of being airborne. You jumped behind enemy lines, held your ground, died if necessary, but did not pull back. The division had never retreated in Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, or Holland. Every position they had taken, they had held until ordered to advance. Retreat was contrary to everything the paratroopers believed about themselves. But Gavin was also a realist. He could see what was happening. The Germans had committed everything they had. The weather had grounded Allied aircraft, removing American air superiority. His division was outnumbered 5-1, and that ratio was getting worse as more German divisions entered the battle. If he tried to hold current positions, he would lose the division. If he pulled back to better ground, he could save his men and still block the German advance. Gavin spent the afternoon of December 23rd with his regimental commanders studying maps and discussing options. The maps showed terrain features, river crossings, road networks, but what mattered most was where the Germans could go if the 82nd pulled back. Could they turn north toward Liège? Could they push west toward the Meuse? Or would they be channeled into approaches where American artillery could destroy them? The Somme River provided a natural defensive barrier. High ground north and west of the river dominated the approaches. Bridges could be destroyed, forcing Germans to conduct opposed river crossings. Artillery positions on the high ground could cover every likely crossing site. If the 82nd withdrew to positions behind the Somme, they would trade territory for a much stronger defensive line. Colonel Tucker argued against retreat on principle. His 504 regiment had earned the nickname Devils in baggy pants from German soldiers who had fought them in Italy. Devils did not retreat, but even Tucker admitted that current positions were becoming untenable. German pressure was increasing daily. Casualties were mounting. Ammunition was running low. At some point, tactical reality had to override institutional pride. On December 24th, at 0200 hours, Gavin issued the order. The 82nd Airborne Division would conduct a fighting withdrawal to new positions north of the Somme River. They would blow the bridges behind them. establish a consolidated defensive line, and prepare for counterattack. It was the first and only time in World War II that the 82nd retreated. Company and battalion commanders received orders at 0330. They would begin pulling back at 0400 hours, company by company, in rotation, with covering fire from units still in position. They would take all weapons, all ammunition, all wounded. They would leave nothing for the Germans. They would mine the roads, blow the bridges, booby-trap buildings, and they would be ready to turn around and attack the moment Gavin gave the word. The withdrawal began in darkness and snow. Paratroopers moved through frozen forests in single file, weapons at ready, eyes scanning for German patrols. Engineers prepared demolitions on every bridge across the Somme. Mortar teams laid down suppressive fire to cover the movement. Artillery batteries displaced to new positions and immediately registered their guns on likely German approach routes. The Germans pursued. Elements of the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer Divisions pushed hard against the American rear guard. Tank battles erupted in pre-dawn darkness. Machine gun fire ripped through trees at head height. American bazooka teams engaged German armor at ranges so close they could see panzer commanders in their cupolas. Rearguard units held tree lines and road junctions while the rest of the division crossed. Fighting was hand-to-hand in some locations. Bayonets, rifle butts, grenades thrown at ranges of 3 meters. The 82nd held long enough for the withdrawal to complete, then pulled back across the last bridges. Engineers detonated charges. The bridge at Salm-Chateau went up in a column of fire and smoke and timber. The Germans reached the riverbank minutes too late. By dawn on December 24th, the 82nd occupied new positions on high ground north and west of the Salm River. They had given up territory. They had conducted a retreat. But they had also saved the division and established a defensive line the Germans could not easily break. The northern shoulder of the Bulge was held. The Germans threw everything they had at the new American positions. On December 21st and 22nd, before the withdrawal, the 82nd had faced counterattacks from 3 powerful Waffen-SS divisions. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, commanded by SS Oberführer Wilhelm Mohnke, tried to relieve Kampfgruppe Peiper but failed due to determined American resistance. The 9th SS Panzer Division attacked the 508 and 504 Regiment positions repeatedly from December 25th through December 28th. Artillery bombardments went on for hours, tank assaults supported by infantry, probing attacks at night to find weak points. The 82nd held every attack, but holding defensive positions was not going to win the battle. Gavin knew this. So did his regimental commanders. Sooner or later, the 82nd would have to attack. The question was when and how. What happened next came from a conversation on December 26th between General Gavin and Colonel Tucker. Tucker found Gavin at division headquarters in Werbomont. The command post was in a farmhouse with walls so thin you could hear artillery fire from 10 kilometers away. Tucker said the Germans were getting comfortable in the villages they had captured. They were setting up supply lines, bringing forward ammunition, preparing defensive positions. If the 82nd waited too long to counterattack, those positions would become too strong to take without massive casualties. Gavin agreed. But a conventional attack, battalions advancing in line with artillery support, would be exactly what the Germans expected. The SS divisions facing the 82nd were not inexperienced troops who would break and run. They were elite units who had stopped Soviet tank armies on the Eastern Front. A straightforward attack would turn into a grinding battle of attrition that outnumbered Americans could not win. Tucker suggested something different. The 504 had been conducting night patrols into German-held territory. Small units, 6 to 10 men, moving through forests in darkness. They were gathering intelligence, capturing prisoners for interrogation, and making the enemy nervous. Patrols reported German security was surprisingly lax in some areas. SS troops were confident, maybe overconfident. They were not expecting aggressive action from Americans who had just retreated. What if, Tucker said, the 82nd used those patrols as basis for a larger operation? Not a conventional attack, but a series of raids conducted by company-sized elements infiltrating German lines at multiple points simultaneously. The raids would create confusion, disrupt enemy logistics, force Germans to pull troops from forward positions to protect rear areas. And while Germans were reacting to raids, the 82nd would launch a full division attack to retake lost ground. Gavin listened. The plan was risky. It required coordination between multiple units, operating independently across a wide front. It required soldiers to move through enemy territory in small groups without artillery support or tank backup. It required a level of training and aggressiveness that most infantry divisions did not possess. But the 82nd Airborne was not most infantry divisions. Gavin approved the plan with one addition. He wanted to attach a small independent parachute battalion to the operation. The 551 Parachute Infantry Battalion had joined the 82nd just before the German attack. They called themselves the Joyers, an acronym for their commander's favourite expression, "Get off your ass." The 551 had seen heavy fighting already, conducting raids and reconnaissance missions that had cost them dearly. They were down to about 643 men from an original strength of over 800, but those men who remained were hard, experienced, and absolutely fearless. Gavin met with the 551's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Woodgeist Joerg, on December 27th. Joerg was a tough, charismatic officer who had earned his men's loyalty by sharing every hardship they faced. He listened to Gavin's plan and said his battalion was ready. They would conduct a night raid to test German defences, penetrate enemy lines, cause as much havoc as possible, and return with prisoners and intelligence. The raid launched just after midnight on December 28th. 3 companies of the 551, moving in darkness through frozen forests, navigating by compass and moonlight. They bypassed German outposts, cut through defensive wire, infiltrated to within meters of enemy positions before anyone noticed them. Then they attacked. Machine guns opened fire from unexpected directions. Mortars dropped rounds directly on German command posts. Squads of paratroopers stormed farmhouses where German officers were sleeping. The fighting was brutal, close range, no quarter given. The 551 killed between 50 and 60 Germans, captured over 20 prisoners, destroyed supply dumps, and withdrew before the enemy could organize a coherent response. They lost 4 men killed and 15 wounded. The captured prisoners provided critical intelligence on German unit dispositions, strength, and morale. The raid proved aggressive action could succeed even against elite enemy forces. Other units in the 82nd conducted similar operations over the following days. Company-sized patrols, infiltrating German lines, hitting targets, withdrawing, platoon-strength raids on isolated enemy positions, sniper teams hunting German officers and NCOs. The cumulative effect was to make Germans cautious, to force them to commit troops to rear area security instead of offensive operations. By January 2nd, 1945, the German offensive had run out of steam. Fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, and most critically, clear weather that allowed Allied aircraft to strike German columns had stopped the advance. The deepest German penetration had reached within 5 kilometers of the Meuse River, but could go no farther. Now it was time for the Allies to counterattack. General Gavin issued orders on January 2nd for a division attack to begin January 3rd. The objective was to drive east, push back German forces in front of the 82nd, and restore original defensive lines along the Salm River. All 3 parachute infantry regiments would attack simultaneously, supported by tanks from attached armour units and maximum available artillery. The attack began at 0700 hours on January 3rd, with a 15-minute artillery barrage on German positions, followed by infantry assault across snow-covered fields. Paratroopers moved forward in extended lines, rifles at ready, bayonets fixed. German positions erupted with defensive fire. Machine guns, mortars, small arms. Men went down. The attack continued. What Germans did not expect was the speed and violence of the American assault. Paratroopers who had been defending for 2 weeks suddenly became attackers. They stormed German trenches with grenades and rifle fire. They overran strongpoints that should have held for hours. They captured village after village that Germans had fortified for defense. The key was that the 82nd's retreat had not broken their morale. If anything, being forced to pull back had made them angry. These were soldiers who took pride in never yielding ground. The retreat had been a tactical necessity, but it had also been an insult to their identity as elite troops. Now they were proving that the retreat had been temporary, strategic, and ultimately a setup for victory. By end of first day, January 3rd, the 82nd had overrun positions held by the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division and remnants of the 9th SS Panzer Division. American forces captured 2,400 German prisoners in a single day. German units that had been fighting effectively for 2 weeks suddenly lost cohesion when hit by coordinated American attack. The 62nd Volksgrenadier Division was routed but not destroyed. It continued to exist until finally eliminated in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945. The fighting continued for several more days. The 82nd pushed east, clearing villages, destroying German rearguards, restoring original defensive perimeter. The 551 Parachute Infantry Battalion received orders on January 6th to attack the village of Rochelinval, a key position on the Salm River. The battalion was down to about 250 men by this point. They had been used hard, conducting raid after raid, taking casualties, never getting adequate rest or reinforcement. The attack on Rochelinval was brutal. Germans held high ground overlooking open approaches. They had machine guns positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. They had artillery pre-registered on likely assault routes. The 551 attacked across open ground without tank support or sufficient artillery. German fire cut them down in waves. Lieutenant Colonel Goerg led from the front. He moved with his assault companies, directing fire, encouraging his men, refusing to take cover while his soldiers were exposed. An artillery tree burst caught him at his command post. Shrapnel tore through his helmet. He died instantly. The 551 continued the attack. They reached German positions and fought hand-to-hand. Bayonet charges, the kind of combat that was supposed to be obsolete in modern warfare, actually worked. Germans, shocked by ferocity of the assault, broke and withdrew. The 551 captured Rochelinval and secured the last bridge across the Salm River in that sector, but the cost was catastrophic. The battalion went into the attack with about 250 men. After Rochelinval, only about 110 were left alive and unwounded. The 551 had effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. On January 27, 1945, General Gavin officially disbanded the battalion. The survivors were absorbed into other units of the 82nd Airborne. Their records were filed away. Their sacrifices were forgotten by everyone except the men who had served with them. The battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism during the Battle of the Bulge, but not until February 23, 2001, 56 years after the battle ended. The 82nd Airborne, however, had achieved exactly what General Gavin intended. The initial retreat saved the division from encirclement and destruction. The subsequent raids disrupted German offensive plans and gathered critical intelligence. The January counterattack routed German forces and restored American defensive lines. The northern shoulder of the Bulge held firm. The German offensive collapsed. The Germans noticed the change immediately. SS Oberführer Wilhelm Mohnke commanded elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division during the Battle of the Bulge. He had fought on the Eastern Front against Soviet forces. He knew what elite troops looked like. In reports dated early January, he noted that American airborne units were fighting with a level of skill and determination that matched or exceeded anything he had seen from Soviet Guards divisions. Mohnke had expected American morale to collapse after the initial German breakthrough. That was what happened to French and British forces in 1940 when German armoured divisions broke through at Sedan. Breakthrough created panic. Panic created retreat. Retreat created collapse. The pattern had repeated itself on every front where Germany had achieved operational surprise. But the Americans in the Ardennes were not collapsing. They were retreating in good order, maintaining unit cohesion, conducting aggressive counterattacks at every opportunity. German intelligence officers interrogated captured American paratroopers to understand what had changed. Interrogation reports described American soldiers, who explained their units had pulled back to better defensive ground, not because they were beaten, but because their commander ordered it. The captured soldiers showed no signs of demoralization, despite being prisoners. They said their units would counterattack as soon as weather cleared, and Allied aircraft could provide support. German tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive action. Their entire military tradition was built on the idea that attack was the best form of defense, that maneuver and shock could overcome superior numbers. This doctrine had worked brilliantly against Poland, France, and the Soviet Union in early years of the war. But it assumed the enemy would react in predictable ways to German attacks. The Americans were not reacting predictably. They retreated when retreat made sense. They counterattacked when opportunities presented themselves. They used artillery with devastating effectiveness. They conducted small unit raids that disrupted German logistics and communications. None of this was particularly sophisticated or innovative. It was just good basic infantry tactics executed by well-trained soldiers. But it was enough to stop the German offensive. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper commanded Kampfgruppe Peiper, the spearhead of the German attack. His battle group had penetrated deepest into American lines. He had expected to reach the Meuse River and cross into open country beyond. Instead, his unit got stopped at Staumont, fought to a standstill by American paratroopers who refused to break. Peiper's unit ran out of fuel, ran out of ammunition, and finally had to abandon all their tanks and retreat on foot. American forces captured his entire armored column. Peiper wrote in his after-action report that American resistance had been far more effective than anticipated. He specifically mentioned that American commanders demonstrated flexibility in defensive tactics, using terrain effectively and conducting local counterattacks that disrupted German momentum. The Germans had a fundamental problem. Their entire offensive plan assumed American forces would react predictably. Breakthrough attacks would cause panic, panic would cause retreat, retreat would cause collapse. That pattern had worked in France in 1940. It had worked in Russia in 1941. It should have worked in the Ardennes in 1944. But it didn't. The 82nd Airborne retreated when retreat made tactical sense. Then they stopped retreating when the defensive position was strong enough. Then they attacked when the enemy was vulnerable. This flexibility, this willingness to make decisions based on actual battlefield conditions rather than doctrine, was something German commanders had not anticipated. By January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was effectively over. German forces withdrew to their starting positions. The Bulge in Allied lines was eliminated. Hitler's last offensive in the West had failed completely. American and British forces resumed their advance toward the Rhine River. The 82nd Airborne had lost over 1,600 men, killed, wounded, and missing during the battle. The 551 Parachute Infantry Battalion had been destroyed as an effective fighting unit. But the division had accomplished its mission. The northern shoulder held. The Germans did not reach the Meuse. The offensive failed. There was no official recognition of the retreat. Army public relations emphasized the defensive stand, the counterattack, the ultimate victory. Nobody wanted to talk about American forces pulling back, even when that pullback was a smart tactical decision. The narrative became that brave paratroopers held their ground against overwhelming odds, which was true, but incomplete. General Gavin became one of the most respected military leaders of the 20th century. After the war, he advocated for airborne and air mobility concepts that transformed American military doctrine. He became lieutenant general, commanded 7th Army in Europe, and after retirement wrote influential books on military strategy. When asked about the Battle of the Bulge, Gavin always emphasized the courage of soldiers who served under his command. He rarely mentioned his own decision-making, especially the decision to retreat. In a 1975 interview, Gavin was asked specifically about the December 24th withdrawal. He said it was the hardest decision he made during the war. The 82nd's identity was built on never retreating, but tactical flexibility required doing what the situation demanded, not what tradition required. The retreat saved the division. The counterattack routed 2 German divisions. That was the outcome that mattered. Colonel Tucker continued to command the 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment through end of war. His regiment received multiple unit citations for gallantry. Tucker stayed in the army after the war, eventually became a brigadier general, and continued to influence airborne tactics for another generation of paratroopers. He always maintained that raid tactics developed during Battle of the Bulge demonstrated what well-trained infantry could accomplish without overwhelming firepower advantages. The tactical lessons from the 82nd's experience became foundational to American military doctrine. The idea that retreat could be a valid tactical option if it preserved combat power for future operations, the concept of using small unit raids to disrupt enemy plans and gather intelligence, the emphasis on aggressive counterattacks immediately after establishing defensive positions. All of these became standard teaching in army schools. But the human story, the story of units that executed these tactics, remains less well known. The 551, attacking Rochelinval with less than half strength and no artillery support, Lieutenant Colonel Joerg dying while leading from the front. The 44 survivors from F Company 325 Glider Infantry at Baraque de Fraiture. These stories matter as much as tactical lessons. Understanding why the 82nd's retreat led to their greatest victory requires understanding what actually happened on the ground. It was not that retreat was a good thing in itself. It was that the retreat was temporary, limited, and immediately followed by aggressive action. The Germans expected broken units running in panic. They got professional soldiers conducting a tactical adjustment, followed by a devastating counterattack. The 82nd's experience also demonstrated the importance of unit cohesion and training. Conducting a fighting withdrawal requires discipline. Soldiers have to move backward while maintaining defensive posture, covering each other, managing ammunition and casualties. Untrained or demoralized troops cannot do this. They panic, they run, they abandon equipment. The 82nd retreated in good order because they were paratroopers, elite troops who had trained together and fought together and trusted each other completely. That trust extended to trusting their commander. When General Gavin ordered the retreat, the soldiers of the 82nd hated the order, but they obeyed it. They believed Gavin knew what he was doing. They believed the retreat was not surrender but strategy. That belief was vindicated when the counterattack succeeded beyond expectations. The German commanders who fought against the 82nd learned lessons they could not apply because the war was almost over. They recognized that American small unit leadership had improved dramatically. They saw that American soldiers were willing to take risks and show initiative. They understood that initial German advantages in experience and equipment were eroding. But by January 1945, Germany had no way to train new divisions to the same standard. They had no fuel for their tanks, no ammunition for sustained operations, no air cover, no strategic reserves. The lessons came too late. German after-action reports from the Battle of the Bulge reveal a grudging respect for American performance. Multiple reports mention that American forces, particularly airborne units, demonstrated significantly better tactical proficiency than Germans had encountered earlier in the war. One report from the 6th Panzer Army headquarters noted that American defensive positions were well sighted, mutually supporting, and difficult to suppress with artillery. Another report mentioned that American artillery fire was consistently accurate and responsive, suggesting good coordination between forward observers and fire direction centers. What the German reports could not explain was why American forces had improved so dramatically. The answer was experience. By December 1944, American units fighting in Europe had been in combat for months or years. They had learned from their mistakes. They had replaced inexperienced commanders with proven leaders. They had developed tactics that worked against German forces. The American army that fought in the Ardennes was not the same army that had landed in Normandy 6 months earlier. It was harder, smarter, and more dangerous. The Germans also failed to appreciate how much American logistics superiority mattered. While German units were running out of fuel and ammunition, American units were being resupplied continuously. While German tank crews had to abandon their vehicles when they ran out of fuel, American tank crews could refuel and rearm without difficulty. While German wounded had limited access to medical care, American wounded were evacuated to hospitals where they received the best medical treatment available. This logistics advantage allowed American forces to sustain operations while German forces gradually lost effectiveness. Perhaps most importantly, the Germans underestimated American willingness to adapt. When the initial German attack achieved surprise and tactical success, German commanders expected Americans to react rigidly, following doctrine even when doctrine didn't match reality. Instead, American commanders like Gavin made pragmatic decisions based on actual conditions. The decision to retreat was not in any manual. It was a judgment call based on the specific situation facing the 82nd. That kind of flexibility was something German forces had once possessed, but had lost as the war progressed, and Hitler increasingly micromanaged military operations. After the Battle of the Bulge ended, the 82nd Airborne rested briefly and then participated in the final Allied offensive into Germany. They crossed the Elbe River in April 1945, advanced over 36 miles in one day, and captured over 100,000 German troops. The rapid movement demonstrated the same tactical flexibility that had characterized their actions in the Ardennes. When resistance was strong, they maneuvered. When the enemy was weak, they attacked. They adapted to circumstances. The lessons learned from the Bulge became part of how the 82nd operated for the rest of the war. Small unit leaders had learned they could make tactical decisions without waiting for orders from higher headquarters. Battalion and company commanders had learned they could conduct complex operations with minimal support if they trusted their soldiers' training. Regimental commanders had learned that unconventional tactics could succeed where conventional attacks would fail. These lessons spread throughout the United States Army. Other divisions studied what the 82nd had done and tried to replicate their methods. Training programs incorporated more emphasis on small unit tactics and night operations. Leadership courses stressed the importance of flexibility and initiative. The army that emerged from World War II was different from the army that entered it, in part because of experiences like the 82nd's retreat and counterattack in the Ardennes. The strategic impact of the 82nd's actions extended beyond just holding the northern shoulder. By forcing the Germans to commit significant forces to try to break through the 82nd's positions, the Americans prevented those forces from being used elsewhere. German divisions that were fighting the 82nd could not be attacking Bastogne or threatening other parts of the line. The 82nd, in effect, fixed a large portion of the German offensive force in place, while American and British forces elsewhere prepared counterattacks. General Dwight Eisenhower recognized the importance of the 82nd's role. In his post-war memoir, Eisenhower wrote that the speed with which airborne divisions deployed to the Ardennes and the tenacity with which they held critical positions were among the key factors that turned the German offensive from a potential disaster into an untold time. Allied victory. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, he noted, demonstrated the value of maintaining strategic reserves capable of rapid deployment. The division accepted the surrender of German forces in their sector on May 2, 1945. General Kurt von Tippelskirch, commander of the German 21st Army, arrived to negotiate terms. He was surprised to find General Gavin standing on a street corner wearing a faded jumpsuit with an M1 rifle slung over his shoulder. Gavin looked like any other soldier, except for the stars on his helmet and collar. Von Tippelskirch reportedly said Gavin was too young and did not look like a general. Gavin said it took only a moment to change his mind. The 82nd returned to the United States in January 1946. They led the victory parade in New York City. Thousands of people lined the streets to cheer the paratroopers marching in formation. The band played, the crowds roared, and nobody mentioned the retreat. Today, the 82nd Airborne Division is still active, still elite, still ready to deploy anywhere in the world on short notice. Their motto is All American, reflecting original composition of soldiers from every state. Their history includes Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, Holland, the Bulge, Iraq, Afghanistan, and dozens of other operations. They remain one of the premier rapid reaction forces in the American military. But the story of the retreat that led to victory remains less celebrated than it should be. Military history tends to favor stories of unbroken defensive stands and dramatic offensive breakthroughs. Tactical withdrawals followed by counterattacks are less appealing. They require understanding that warfare is about achieving objectives, not about holding arbitrary lines on maps. General Gavin understood this. So did his regimental commanders. So did the battalion and company commanders executing the retreat and counterattack. Most importantly, So did the individual paratroopers in frozen foxholes, who pulled back when ordered, then attacked when ordered, and never questioned whether their leaders knew what they were doing. That is how military excellence actually develops, not through rigid adherence to doctrine, but through leaders who understand when to follow doctrine and when to adapt, not through troops who never retreat, but through troops who retreat when necessary and attack when possible, not through avoiding difficult decisions, but through making those decisions based on tactical reality rather than institutional pride. The 82nd Airborne's retreat on December 24, 1944, was not a failure. It was a tactical decision that saved 8,520 men from encirclement and destruction. The counterattack on January 3, 1945, was not just a victory. It was proof that the retreat had been strategic, temporary, and ultimately the foundation for success. The Germans expected American forces to collapse after retreating. Instead, they encountered soldiers who used retreat as a tool, not a surrender. That is the lesson that deserves to be remembered. Not that the 82nd never retreated. They did retreat, once, on December 24, 1944, but they retreated professionally, purposefully, and with full intention of counterattacking at the first opportunity. That counterattack destroyed German offensive capability on the northern shoulder of the Bulge. That counterattack proved tactical flexibility can be more valuable than stubborn defense. That counterattack showed that sometimes the best way to win is to step back, reassess, and strike when conditions favor success, rather than dying in place when they don't. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe to stay connected with histories that deserve to be remembered. And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans the globe. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of something important here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.